The dolorous passion and death of our Lord Jesus Christ. Chapter 24. The Palace of Pilate and its surroundings. At the foot of the northwestern corner of the Temple Mount stood the Palace of Pilate, the Roman governor. It was on somewhat of an elevation and was reached by a long flight of marble steps. It overlooked a spacious square surrounded by a colonnade under which vendors sat to sell their wares. A guardhouse and 4 entrances on the north, south, east, and west sides, respectively, broke the uniformity of the colonnade enclosing the square, which was called the Forum, and which on the east stretched over the northwest corner of the Temple Mount. From this end of the Forum, one could see as far as Mount Sion. Pilate's palace lay to the south. The Forum was somewhat higher than the surrounding streets, which sloped down from it. On the outer side of the colonnade, the houses of the neighboring streets adjoined it in some places. Pilate's palace did not adjoin the Forum. A spacious court separated the two. On the eastern side of this court was a high arched gateway, which opened into a street that led to the Sheep Gate on the road to Mount Olivet. On the western side was another gateway like the first, which led to the west of the city through the section Acre and up to Sion. From Pilate's steps one could see across the court and into the Forum, which lay to the north and whose entrance at that point was furnished with columns and stone seats, the latter resting against the courtyard wall. As far as these seats and no farther would the Jewish priests approach the judgment hall of Pilate, in order not to incur defilement. A line was even drawn across the pavement of the court to indicate the precise boundary. Near the western gateway of the court was erected in the precincts of the square a large guardhouse, which extending to the Forum on the north and on the south connecting by means of the gateway with the Praetorium of Pilate, formed a forecourt and an atrium from the Forum to the Praetorium. That part of Pilate's palace used as a judgment hall was called the Praetorium. The guardhouse was surrounded by columns. It had an open court in the center, under which were the prisons in which the 2 robbers were confined. This court was alive with Roman soldiers. In the Forum, not far from this guardhouse and near the colonnade that surrounded it, stood the whipping pillar. Several others were standing in the enclosure of the square. The nearest were used for corporal punishment. To the most distant were fastened the beasts for sale. On the Forum in front of the guardhouse was a terrace, level and beautiful, something like a place of execution, furnished with stone seats and reached by a flight of stone steps. From this place, which was called Gabbatha, Pilate was accustomed to pronounce solemn sentence. The marble steps that gave access to Pilate's palace led to an open terrace from which the governor listened to the plaintiffs, who sat opposite on the stone benches next the entrance to the Forum. By speaking in a loud voice from the terrace, one could easily be heard in the Forum. Back of Pilate's palace rose still higher terraces with gardens and summerhouses. By these gardens, the palace was connected with the dwelling of Pilate's wife, whose name was Claudia Procla. A moat separated these buildings from the mountain on which the temple was built. Adjoining the eastern side of Pilate's palace was that council house or judgment hall of Herod the Elder, in whose inner court many innocent children were once upon a time murdered. Its appearance was now somewhat changed, owing to the addition of new buildings. The entrance was from the eastern side, although there was still one from Pilate's hall. 4 streets ran hither from the eastern section of the city, 3 toward Pilate's palace and the Forum. The 4th passed the northern side of the latter toward the gate that led to Bethsur. Near this gate and on this street stood the beautiful house owned by Lazarus in Jerusalem, and not far from it a dwelling belonging to Martha. Of these 4 streets, the one that was nearest to the temple extended from the Sheep Gate. On entering the latter, one found on his right the probatica, or pool in which the sheep were washed. It was built so close to the wall that the arches above it were constructed in that same wall. It had a drain outside the wall down into the valley of Josaphat, on which account this place, just before the gate, was marshy. Some buildings surrounded the pool. The paschal lambs were, before being taken to the temple, washed here for the first time. But at the pool of Bethsaida, south of the temple, they afterward received a more solemn purification. In the second street stood a house and courtyard that once belonged to Mary's mother, Saint Anne. She and her family used to put up there with their cattle for sacrifice when they went to Jerusalem for the festival days. In this house also, if I remember rightly, Joseph and Mary's wedding was celebrated. The forum, as I have said, stood higher than the surrounding streets, through which ran gutters down to the sheep pool. On Mount Sion, opposite the ancient citadel of David, stood a similar forum. To the southeast and in its vicinity lay the Coenaculum, and to the north were the judgment halls of Annas and Caiaphas. The citadel of David was now a deserted, dilapidated fortress full of empty courts, stables, and chambers, which were hired as resting places to caravans and travelers with their beasts of burden. This building had already long lain deserted. Even at the birth of Christ, I saw it in its present condition. The retinue of the three holy kings with its numerous beasts of burden put up at it